still figuring this channel out. I don't think I'm going to do a ton of these like craft-like videos, but there is one piece of craft that I love and that I want to talk to you about today. It is the 5-act structure. It was critical to me in writing my show, 6 Sermons, the Audible original starring Stephanie Hsu. That show did great. So much so because of its spine, this sturdy structural spine that the 5-act structure provides. You can use the 5-act structure for TV shows, for series, for novels. I've even tried it recently with short stories, and it still kind of works. So I thought you should know about it. My basis for the 5-act structure comes from a blogger, screenwriter called The Hulk. He wrote a book about structure and screenwriting, and I was first introduced to the 5-act structure through him. And his foundation for analysis is Shakespeare's 5-act structure. So in terms of kind of the underpinnings of what I'm going to share, those are where they come from. There's lots of ways that people talk about the 5-act structure. That's how I'm going to talk about it. Second preface here is that I am going to go through the plot of 6 Sermons, the show that I spoke of before. If at any point you are excited and haven't listened to it already and want to go listen to it, there will be spoilers. So using that show as an example, the first act within a 5-act structure is traditionally identified as the exposition, the setup, but I want to get in there a little bit more. And critical to my conception of the 5-act structure is that the first act includes a lot of pre-existing conflict, right? Things are already kind of messed up. So in 6 Sermons, we have this young woman, this young pastor played by Stephanie Hsu, and she is struggling. She is left of center, and this is a really like centrist congregation, so they're not exactly welcoming her politically. She's Asian in a majority white congregation, so there's a little bit of kind of subtle racism excluding her. Basically, she's struggling. She thinks she's hot shit, but like people aren't accepting her. Things are already bad before the story really kicks off. And so that's what Act 1 is. It's kind of setting up your character's problems, the conflicts. Another way to think about this is in a Shakespeare play would be Romeo and Juliet. Before Romeo even meets Juliet, the Capulets and the Montagues are like killing each other. There's huge problems. Romeo's like heartsick, lots of conflict before the main story starts. And that's what happens in Act 2. So to carry through with Romeo and Juliet, Romeo meets Juliet. This is the main thing that gets the show going, right? Act 2 contains the inciting incident, the event that the main character or characters sort of the thing that happens that kicks the story into motion. With 6 Sermons, what happens, spoilers, is that Stephanie Hsu's mentor, the senior pastor at this church, she's the associate pastor, her mentor and the senior pastor kills himself, takes his life, sending everything into crisis. And so this is the inciting incident. This is the critical Act 2 moment that propels us into the story. The story being that Alexis, that's the name of this young pastor, has to reckon with her grief. The congregation is now in crisis without their senior pastor. The central kind of like problems of the plot, the journey that we're about to go on is unfolding. And so when the pastor kills himself, everything sort of goes into action, just as when Romeo meets Juliet, all of a sudden, boom, we have a play. Now, Act 3 usually involves kind of most critically the midpoint, what's traditionally identified as the midpoint, which is this giant plot point that kind of moves the story in a new direction. Now, you might know about midpoints. Sometimes midpoints are a false defeat, a false victory, to try to provide a little bit more additional context around a successful midpoint in terms of this like 5-act conception of a story is that Act 3, the midpoint, takes whatever conflict that you initially set up all the way back in Act 1, these initial problems that your characters are living in, and makes them worse. So Romeo kills Tybalt. This is a massive problem, exacerbating the conflict between the Montagues and the Capulets. In 6 Sermons, the midpoint is when Pastor Alexis has a crack up in front of her congregation. She's in the middle of a sermon. She totally loses it, breaks down, starts questioning her faith in God publicly in front of all these people who are relying on her. So her initial conflict of the initial conflict of her not being accepted, her being not a great pastor to these people, is all of a sudden made a zillion times worse because she just did the ultimate failure, which is she couldn't even finish her sermon without blaspheming, right? Without like calling down the very God that they're all there to worship together. Act 4. So Act 4 refers to the spiral. So the spiral is when the main character or characters is making a bunch of decisions, where they're making decisions. Remember that good protagonists, interesting protagonists are always making decisions that propel them towards their end. It's their decisions that we're tracking that's developing their characters. And so in Act 4, these decisions are happening in quick succession. Everything has happened that's kind of put your character into a new state of crisis. The midpoint has kind of cracked open the whole story. And it's almost like they're starting fresh and they start making all these decisions. They flee, Romeo and Juliet flee, they go to the friar. Things are kind of falling apart. And similarly in Six Sermons, Pastor Alexis, she leaves the church, she drives out of town, and she has this kind of like, she's trying to figure herself out. She decides to post up, and then she decides to come back, and then she decides to to resign, all these things. And so what we see here from a sort of experiential point is the story is accelerating. You know this intuitively, right? It happens in every movie, really any kind of commercial movie you see. It's like we get into that third act of the movie, and things start like pummeling forward towards the finale, Act 5. Act 5 is when things, of course, get wrapped up. But what does that really mean, right? Like, it's not just that the end happens. Essentially, Act 5 goes all the way back to Act 1. What were the initial problems this character had? What were their flaws? Did they overcome these flaws, right? Or did they not? Romeo did not overcome his inability to love effectively, right? It did not work out for him. Or did they, right? So we go back to these initial questions that the story set out to see if they've overcome them. In Six Sermons, Pastor Alexis, she didn't get along with the congregation. They didn't like her. She wasn't pastoring well. She was kind of just not doing a good job. By the end, she has returned to the church. She's pulled herself together. She executes the leadership that this congregation needs in this moment of crisis and triumphs. So Act 5 is critical. It sort of is the thesis in some ways of the piece. If you want to be reductive in that way, which I don't recommend, but kind of still thinking schematically can give us support when trying to write. It kind of serves as the final sentence, the final idea that you're leaving us with, that by fighting hard enough, you can be a leader, you can overcome the grief of suicide and carry on in a way that's positive, or you can't, and you and your lover take your life and leave your families in a state of public grief. 5-act structure. Thank you for being here. I'm Asa Merritt.